The rain tapped gently against the window as the dim glow of a street light flickered outside. Inside a small but cozy home, David sat at the dining table, his head resting in his hands. The weight of disappointment pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had just returned from another failed job interview, his heart heavy with frustration. No matter how hard he tried, success always seemed just out of reach. His father, Mr. Thompson, watched him from across the room. He had seen that look before, the look of a young man on the verge of giving up. Slowly, he walked over and sat beside his son, placing a firm but gentle hand on his shoulder. "David," he said in a calm, steady voice, "do you know the real secret to success?" David sighed. "I don't know, Dad. I've done everything I was supposed to, studied hard, worked hard, followed all the advice. But nothing seems to work." Mr. Thompson smiled faintly, the lines on his face deepening. "That's where most people go wrong, son. They think success is about doing what everyone else does, but it's not. Success is a journey, not a destination. It's about understanding yourself, pushing through failures, and never giving up. But more importantly, it's about knowing the right lessons." David frowned. "The right lessons? What do you mean?" His father leaned back, his gaze lost in the flickering candle on the table. "Let me tell you a story. A story about a man who, just like you, felt lost. He thought he had failed too many times, but he discovered something that changed his life forever." David looked up, curiosity replacing his frustration. "What happened to him?" Mr. Thompson's voice dropped to a whisper, almost as if he were revealing a long-guarded secret. "He learned that success isn't about luck. It's about something far deeper, something most people never realize until it's too late." David leaned in, his heart pounding slightly. He had no idea that this conversation was about to change everything. David sat up straighter, his curiosity fully awakened. The rain outside had grown heavier, the rhythmic patter against the window filling the quiet room. His father's eyes held a distant look, as if he were traveling back in time, reliving something important. "This man," Mr. Thompson began, his voice steady, "had dreams just like yours. He wanted a good life, to make something of himself. But no matter how hard he tried, he failed. Over and over again. Every door closed in his face. Every effort led to another disappointment." David swallowed hard. It sounded too familiar, too close to what he was feeling now. "He started to believe that maybe he wasn't meant for success," his father continued. "That maybe he just wasn't good enough. He watched others move ahead while he stayed stuck in the same place." "Sound familiar?" David nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "But then," his father said, his voice dropping just a little, "something happened. Something that changed everything." David leaned in unconsciously. "What was it?" Mr. Thompson exhaled, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "One evening, just like this, the man met someone, an old mentor, someone wiser than him. And that mentor asked him a simple question. 'Do you really know what success is?' David frowned. "Isn't success just achieving your goals? Getting what you want?" His father smiled knowingly. "That's what most people think." But the mentor told him something different. He said, "Success isn't about what you achieve. It's about what you learn. And more importantly, it's about how you keep going when everything seems to be against you." David stared at his father, waiting for more. He had heard plenty of motivational speeches before, but something about the way his father spoke made him feel like there was something deeper, something he was missing. "The mentor gave the man a challenge," Mr. Thompson went on. "He told him, 'Go and fail on purpose. Try something difficult and expect to fail. And when you do, come back and tell me what you learned.'" David's brow furrowed. That doesn't make sense. Why would he want him to fail on purpose? "Because," his father said, his eyes locking onto David's, "most people fear failure so much that they never take real risks. They stay safe, doing what they think will work. But success doesn't come from playing it safe. It comes from stepping into the unknown, from learning through failure. David sat back in his chair, the words sinking in. So, did the man do it? Did he fail? His father chuckled softly. Oh, he failed. Many times. He took the mentor's advice and started challenging himself in ways he never had before. He tried things he had been afraid to try. And with each failure, he learned something new. He began to see patterns, to understand why things didn't work. And little by little, he started succeeding where he had once failed. David let out a slow breath, his mind turning over the words. But how do you know when you're learning the right lessons? What if you just keep failing without getting anywhere? His father nodded thoughtfully. That's the tricky part. Most people stop at failure and never look deeper. They get discouraged and walk away. But the ones who truly succeed, they ask the right questions. They don't just see failure as the end. They see it as a teacher. David thought about his own struggles, his rejected applications, the interviews that went nowhere, the feeling of being stuck. Had he been looking at it all wrong? Had he been so focused on what wasn't working that he never stopped to ask why? Mr. Thompson studied his son's face, as if reading his thoughts. You're at a crossroads, David. You can keep feeling like a victim of circumstance, or you can start seeing every failure as a clue, a lesson. If you do that, I promise you, things will start to change. David remained silent for a long moment. The sound of the rain, the warmth of the dimly lit room, the weight of his father's words, all of it pressed against him. Did the man ever meet his mentor again? He finally asked. His father's lips curled into a faint smile. Yes, and when he did, he thanked him. Not because he had finally succeeded, but because he had finally understood what real success was. David nodded slowly, something shifting inside him. He wasn't sure what his next step would be, but for the first time in a long while, he felt something different. Hope. His father patted his shoulder and stood up. Think about it, son. The answer you're looking for isn't out there. It's in how you choose to see things. David watched his father walk away, his mind still spinning. He had come home feeling defeated, but now, something had changed. He wasn't sure what was waiting for him tomorrow, but one thing was certain. He was going to look at it differently. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something new. The night stretched on, but David couldn't sleep. His father's words echoed in his mind, challenging everything he had believed about success and failure. He had always thought that working hard was enough, that following the rules would eventually lead to something good. But now, he wasn't so sure. Was he really learning from his failures, or had he just been running from them? Staring at the ceiling, David thought back to the interview earlier that day. He had been prepared. His resume was polished, his answers rehearsed. Yet, as soon as the interviewer started asking deeper questions, doubts had crept in. His confidence wavered, and before he knew it, the opportunity had slipped through his fingers. It wasn't the first time. Each rejection felt like another weight pressing down on him, making it harder to believe he would ever move forward. But what if he had been looking at it wrong? What if there was something in those failures that he hadn't paid attention to? The next morning, David woke up with a different mindset. Instead of feeling discouraged, he was determined to analyze what had gone wrong. He opened his laptop and went through his job applications. He reread the rejection emails, searching for patterns. He realized that most of them didn't say he lacked skills, they said he lacked experience, or that he wasn't the right fit. But what did that really mean? Feeling restless, he decided to go for a walk. The crisp morning air cleared his thoughts as he wandered through the quiet streets. He found himself heading toward a small coffee shop where he used to study during college. It had been a long time since he had last stepped inside. The familiar scent of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries filled the air as he ordered a drink and found a seat by the window. As he stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, He overheard a conversation at the table next to him. A man in a dark suit was speaking to someone younger, offering advice about career growth. David listened closely. "The key," the man said, "is to stop waiting for opportunities to come to you. You have to go out there and create them." David's grip tightened around his cup. Was that his mistake? Was he just waiting instead of actively making something happen? Before he could think about it too much, his phone buzzed. It was an email from another company, another rejection. He exhaled slowly, but instead of frustration, he felt something different this time. He looked around the cafe, watching people immersed in their own lives, their own struggles. A memory surfaced. Back in college, he had once helped a friend with a startup project. It had been a small idea, nothing major, but he had enjoyed working on something creative, something that wasn't just about following a job description. He had almost forgotten how that felt. An idea formed in his mind, but before he could explore it further, his phone rang. It was Jake, one of his closest friends from university. They hadn't talked in a while, but seeing his name on the screen gave David a strange sense of timing, like the universe was nudging him toward something. "Hey man," David answered. "David." "It's been a while," Jake said, his voice upbeat. "Listen, I need some help with something. You've always been good with problem solving, and I think you'd be perfect for this." David frowned. "Help with what?" Jake hesitated. "I'll explain in person. Can you meet me later today?" David glanced at his laptop, then back out the window. Maybe this was the opportunity he needed. Or maybe it was just another distraction. Either way, something told him he had to find out. "Yeah," David said finally. "Let's meet." As he hung up the call, he felt the first stirrings of something different. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of possibility. But what he didn't know was that this meeting would change everything. David arrived at the cafe a few minutes early. The weight of uncertainty sat heavily on his shoulders, but there was also something else, a quiet sense of anticipation. He had no idea what Jake wanted, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was stepping toward something rather than away from it. He scanned the room until he spotted Jake sitting at a corner table, typing something on his laptop. "David." "Over here," Jake called out as soon as he noticed him. His expression was eager, his energy almost contagious. David sat down, glancing at the open screen. "All right, what's this about?" Jake leaned forward. "I've been working on a startup idea, something big, but I hit a roadblock. And I need someone who can think differently, someone who isn't afraid to take risks." David raised an eyebrow. "And you thought of me?" Jake chuckled. "Of course. You were always the guy who saw solutions where no one else did. I remember how you helped me during college when I was stuck on that business project. You have a way of breaking things down." David looked at him, unsure. "What exactly is this idea?" Jake turned the laptop around so David could see. The screen displayed a pitch deck, filled with slides, charts, and bullet points. It's an online platform designed to connect young professionals with companies based on skills rather than just experience. The job market is broken, David. People like you, people who have the talent but not the right experience, get overlooked. I want to change that. David stared at the screen, his mind racing. The idea made sense. He had felt the frustration firsthand, being rejected over and over despite having the ability to do the work. But could this really go somewhere? "I need you to help refine it," Jake continued. "To see what's missing, what needs to be fixed. And if you believe in it, I want you on board." David hesitated. This wasn't what he had expected. Was he ready to take such a big leap? His father's words echoed in his mind, about stepping into the unknown, about learning from failures instead of fearing them. "What if this fails?" David asked. Jake grinned. "Then we'll learn. And we'll try again. But what if it works?" The question lingered in the air. David thought back to the endless cycle of rejection, the frustration of feeling stuck. This was different. This was a chance to take control instead of waiting for someone else to give him an opportunity. His heart pounded as he made his decision. "All right," he said slowly. "I'm in." Jake clapped him on the shoulder. "You won't regret this." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. David and Jake worked late into the nights, refining the platform, testing ideas, fixing what didn't work. The process was exhausting, frustrating at times, but also exhilarating. For the first time in a long while, David felt alive. But just as things started coming together, they hit their biggest challenge yet. One evening, David was at his desk, staring at his screen, frustration building. "Jake, this isn't working," he said, rubbing his temples. "The companies we're reaching out to aren't biting. They still care about experience. No one's willing to take a risk on talent alone." Jake sighed. "We just need to find the right angle. There has to be a way to prove that skill matters more than a resume." David thought for a long moment. Then an idea struck him. What if we make it a challenge? What if we get real companies to give applicants tasks instead of looking at their resumes? A skills test that speaks louder than a piece of paper. Jake's eyes lit up. A competition. A way to showcase ability in real time. David nodded. "If we can get one company to agree, we can prove this works." It was a long shot, but they had come too far to give up now. The next few days were spent reaching out to companies, refining their pitch, trying to get someone to take the leap with them. Then, just when they were about to lose hope, an email came in. A tech company had agreed to participate. David and Jake stared at the screen, hardly believing it. "This is it," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is our chance." David exhaled, his pulse racing. They had worked for this moment, fought through failures and doubts. But the hardest part was still ahead. If this didn't work, everything they had built would fall apart. And as the deadline approached, the pressure became unbearable. The fear of failure crept back in, stronger than ever. David lay awake the night before the big launch, staring at the ceiling, doubts swirling in his mind. What if this failed? What if they had been wrong all along? His father's words returned to him once more. Success wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about pushing through it. But as the sun rose and the moment of truth arrived, David realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about proving a point. This was about proving himself. And failure was no longer an option. The morning of the launch arrived, and David felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. The challenge they had created, the very thing that could prove their idea worked, was now out in the open. If it failed, it wouldn't just be a setback. It would be proof to everyone, including himself, that he wasn't cut out for this. Jake was already at the co-working space when David arrived, pacing back and forth, phone in hand. The atmosphere was tense. The first batch of applicants had already started the challenge, but they needed at least one company to express genuine interest for this to be considered a success. David dropped his bag on the table. "Any word yet?" Jake shook his head. "Some companies are watching, but no one's made a move. If no one steps up soon," he trailed off, running a hand through his hair. David swallowed hard. They had worked so hard for this moment. They couldn't afford for it to fall apart now. Minutes turned into hours. The challenge went on, participants showcasing their skills in real time. Some did exceptionally well, others struggled. The concept was working, people were proving their talent. But if no companies responded, none of it would matter. Then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression unreadable. David's stomach tightened. "Who is it?" Jake hesitated, then slowly exhaled. "It's not a company. It's someone else. Someone I didn't expect." David frowned. "Who?" Jake tapped his screen a few times before turning the phone toward him. The name on the email made David's breath catch. It was from one of the biggest job recruitment firms in the industry. David stared at the screen. Why would they be reaching out? Jake scrolled through the email quickly, then looked up, his face serious. They're not looking to partner with us. They see us as a threat. David felt a chill run through him. What do you mean? Jake's voice was tense. They're questioning our methods. They claim our system is unreliable, that companies won't trust it, and that it could disrupt the entire hiring industry in a way that isn't sustainable. David's heart pounded. He had expected obstacles, but he hadn't anticipated this. If a major firm was already trying to shut them down before they even took off, it meant one thing: they had caught the attention of the right people. They're worried, Jake muttered, almost to himself. David clenched his jaw. Because they know we're onto something. Jake nodded. But this also means we're going to have a fight on our hands. David exhaled, gripping the edge of the table. This changed everything. It wasn't just about proving their concept anymore. They were up against an industry that had no interest in change. An industry that thrived on keeping things the way they were. The stakes had just gotten higher. And failure wasn't just about them anymore. It was about every person out there who had ever been told they weren't good enough simply because of a resume. David looked at Jake, determination burning in his eyes. We're not backing down, he said. Jake met his gaze and nodded. Then let's fight. Neither of them knew what would happen next. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just a project anymore. It was a battle. And they were just getting started. David and Jake knew they had no choice but to push forward. The challenge was live, the applicants were proving their worth, and now they had the attention of not just companies but also a powerful recruitment firm that saw them as a threat. The pressure had never been greater, but neither of them was willing to back down. As the final hours of the challenge ticked away, David's phone vibrated. Another email. He took a deep breath before opening it, half expecting another warning or criticism. But as he read the words, his pulse quickened. Jake noticed his expression change. What is it? David turned the screen toward him. A company just made an offer. They're willing to hire the top performer straight from our platform. For a moment, neither of them spoke. This was exactly what they had been waiting for. Proof that the system worked. That skills could speak louder than experience. Jake let out a short laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. We did it. But David wasn't smiling. Something didn't feel right. He refreshed his inbox, and another email popped up, this one from the recruitment firm again. His eyes skimmed the message, and his stomach dropped. They're trying to discredit us, he said quietly. They're claiming we manipulated the results. They're saying our challenge isn't fair, that the hiring process should remain structured to prevent bias. Jake's face darkened. They're trying to shut us down before we even get started. David knew they had to act fast. If their credibility was questioned, it wouldn't matter that a company was willing to hire from them. The doubt alone could be enough to stop them in their tracks. Without hesitating, he pulled up the data from the challenge, showing the performance metrics, the unbiased ranking system they had designed, and the proof that everything had been done fairly. Then he did something bold. He sent the report not just to the recruitment firm but to every company that had been watching their challenge unfold. Jake watched him hit send. Are you sure about this? David nodded. If they want to question us, let them. But we're not hiding. If we're going to prove that talent matters more than a resume, we need to be transparent about everything. For the next few hours, they could do nothing but wait. The tension was unbearable. If their credibility was destroyed, all their work would be for nothing. Then, just before midnight, David's phone rang. It was the company that had made the job offer. He hesitated for a second before answering. Hello. A deep voice responded. We've reviewed everything. We believe in what you're doing. David's breath caught. We're not just hiring one candidate, the man continued. We're restructuring our hiring process to integrate your platform. And we're not the only ones. Others are reaching out, too. David could hardly believe what he was hearing. He looked at Jake, barely able to contain the surge of emotions. When the call ended, Jake leaned in. What did they say? David exhaled, a slow smile forming. We won. For the first time in months, the weight on his shoulders lifted. The risks, the failures, the doubts, it had all led to this moment. But just as they started celebrating, another email arrived. This time, it wasn't from a company or the recruitment firm. It was from an unknown sender. David clicked on it, expecting spam. But as he read the message, his heart pounded. Success comes with a price. Be careful what you've started. David's hands tightened around his phone. He looked at Jake, his excitement fading into something else. Because they had won this battle. But the war was just beginning. David stared at the email, his pulse still racing. The words were simple, but the weight they carried was heavy. Someone was watching them. Someone who didn't want them to succeed. Jake leaned in, reading over his shoulder. He exhaled sharply. That's unsettling. David nodded slowly, his mind spinning. The threat was vague, but the message was clear. There were people who weren't happy about what they had built. He thought about the recruitment firm that had tried to discredit them, the companies that had ignored them, the entire system they were challenging. They had shaken things up, and now there were consequences. For a brief moment, doubt crept in again. Was this a mistake? Had they pushed too far? But then he thought about the candidates who had proven themselves, the company that had embraced their idea, and the people who finally had a chance to be recognized for their skills instead of their backgrounds. This wasn't just about them anymore. Jake straightened. We knew this wouldn't be easy. If we back down now, they win. David met his gaze, the determination returning. We're not backing down. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. More companies started reaching out, interested in what they were doing. The challenge had caught attention, and while some still resisted change, others were willing to take the leap. Their platform wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was becoming a real alternative to traditional hiring. At the same time, the resistance grew stronger. The recruitment firm continued to spread doubt, claiming that experience and structured hiring processes couldn't be replaced. Some companies backed out, afraid of taking risks. But David and Jake kept going, refining their system, improving their model, and proving, one success story at a time, that talent mattered more than a piece of paper. One evening, David found himself sitting alone in his apartment, staring at his laptop screen. He had been working non-stop, answering emails, tweaking the platform, trying to stay ahead of every challenge. He felt exhausted, but he also felt something else, proud. His father's words echoed in his mind. Success isn't about never failing. It's about standing back up every time you do. For so long, David had feared failure. He had let rejection define him, believing that every closed door was proof that he wasn't good enough. But now, he saw it differently. The setbacks, the struggles, they weren't the end. They were part of the journey. His phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the candidates who had gone through their challenge. I got the job. Thank you for believing in people like me. David smiled. This was why they had started. This was why they had fought so hard. Months passed, and their platform continued to grow. It wasn't easy. There were always obstacles, always people trying to push back against change. But for every challenge, there was a victory. More people were getting hired based on their skills. More companies were opening their doors to talent they would have otherwise overlooked. One day, David got a call from a reporter who had been following their story. She wanted to do a feature on them, to talk about how they had disrupted the industry. As he sat down for the interview, she asked him a question that made him pause. If you could go back to the moment you got your first rejection letter, what would you tell yourself? David thought for a moment, then smiled. I'd tell myself that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of it. As the interview wrapped up, he looked around at everything they had built. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And this was just the beginning. Because success wasn't about never falling. It was about rising every single time.